Public Q&A presents AskReddit question. Which real-life serial killer frightened/disturbed you the most? Toolbox killers. The transcript of the tape of Shirley Ledford's torture was one of the most terrifying things I have read. Some sick fucks. Bitaker and Norris. There's some footage on YouTube of the local station covering the trial, but were not allowed in the courtroom, had to stay in the hallway. Apparently one of the tapes was played in open court, and there are shots of various people coming out in varying degrees of distress just from listening. Makes me very pleased that those two are dead. You can hear a tiny bit of the tape in one of the news bits before someone runs out. It's horrible. I have heard the FBI uses those tapes to desensitize agents, or to give them an idea of the fucked up shit they might see. Those transcripts are chilling. Yes, I would strongly agree. Reading those transcripts left me pretty fucked up for a few days. The recordings that they made of their crimes are now used in desensitization training for the FBI. That's how fucked up they are. I read the transcript for one of the many tapes they made, and that was more than enough for me. To actually hear the genuine screaming of the victim, when you know exactly what's happening to them. That's got to be a whole new level of sickening. William Bonin, aka the Freeway Killer, killed my childhood friend in 1980. He was 16. I was 15 at the time, and that is too young an age to wrap your head around having a friend a victim of a serial killer. It changed me. Jesus. I am so sorry you experienced that. Thank you. I am 55 years old now, and still, when I think about it, it breaks my heart. His body was found in such a horrific manner. When you are 15 years old, you just can't fathom. But then life dishes some hard lessons, and the realization of it is manageable. Just barely, though. I was able to hear the news of Bonin execution by radio, and breathed a sigh of relief, although I will never understand how Bonin found recruits to help in his killings. It's a sad story. Thank you for your reply. Was he the one who picked up young boys who were hitchhiking? And Steve was only hitchhiking to get back to school after a dental appointment. It was okay in those days and safer. And Steve was a small guy and probably an easy target. That's why those guys were so successful. Nobody thought anything like that would ever happen, just hitchhiking to the next town or whatever. I agree. It broke my heart the day his sister said on our school bus that Steve was missing. No one would have thought this could happen. To this day, I will never understand Bonin and his ways, and at 15 years old I really couldn't. Like I said earlier, it changed me. Golden State Killer, when he would stay in the room. Yup, victims would wait hours blindfolded thinking he's gone, but he's still in the room. Oh fuck, was that the guy who told people exactly what he'd do to them if they ran or tried to get help, and then he'd go silent for hours? Didn't some people survive him by following his orders? That's some advanced psychological torture. You know you and your family are in danger. You've not heard him in what must have been an hour or two. Is he going to return? Is now my chance? Wait, did he even leave? You don't know where he went or if he went. You're blindfolded and don't even know if it's morning yet. A fear of the unknown is the worst fear to people. It seems like that's what the Golden State Killer fed off of. He was the guy who raped at least 50 people and killed 13 that we know of. A lot of his victims did survive, because he didn't seem to actually start killing people until later on. And he would tie people up and put stacks of dishes on their backs, and say, if I hear even one sound I will kill. The blank is there because it really depended on the situation. It could be them, or he could be putting them on a man's back saying he's going to kill his wife, then he would go in the next room and rape her. There was one time where there was a girl around 12 and her mom, and he had them tied up in different rooms, and put the dishes on the mom's back. And yeah, Then he would leave them there tied up with dishes on their backs while he sat around and drank their beer, and helped himself to their food. I'll Be Gone in the Dark is a really good docuseries on this. It really focuses on the victims, and what they were going through, as well as Michelle McNamara, Patton Oswalt's late wife, because she put so much work into investigating the cases and trying to catch him. Unfortunately, she passed 2 years before he was finally caught. I listened to the audiobook of I'll Be Gone in the Dark alone at home at night. After hearing how he spent weeks spying on his victims, I had to check all the window locks and close all the blinds. The story of the woman who kept feeling like someone was watching her, then looked outside and saw him looking and freaked me the fuck out. I caught a guy peeking in my window once, and had that someone's looking at me feeling when it happened, so that really stuck a chord for me. Yeah, and he'd tie men up while he raped their spouses in another room. He'd stack dishes on the men's back and say he'll kill them all if he hears the dishes move. Hard to do, but if you can put the psychological torture aside for a moment, disturbed sense of time, adrenaline, tense muscles, the physical strain of being tied up on your stomach, dishes balancing on your back, you focus on not moving, pain from bindings, being so unimaginably physically uncomfortable, and after hours in the same position, would guess muscle cramps could been horrible and terrifying. I get Charlie horses and have a neuromuscular condition, so my muscles are spasming and cramping all the time. But staying still enough to keep a stack of dishes on your back would evolve from mental to physical torture or solid mix of both. Golden State Killer is so fucking evil. And while I am glad he didn't fight in court, fuck the feeble old man act he and other shitbags try to pull off in court. Heard he walked just fine in jail after. And he could break in without sound. Fucking boogeyman. Ugh, definitely. He was arrested just a few streets over from where I live. We probably crossed paths at some point over the last couple of decades. So creepy. I live just a town or two over, born and raised here. He's literally been within a 10-mile radius of me my entire life. Crazy to think about how I easily could have seen him in a grocery store, at my job, walking down the street, who knows. I am glad he's caught now. The book I'll Be Gone in the Dark captures his horror chillingly. It's in the title from this quote. You'll be silent forever and I'll be gone in the dark. Something he said to a victim. The Axeman of New Orleans basically forced the entire city into playing jazz music, so he would spare their lives. Pretty horrific deaths, and nobody was ever charged for the killings. Wasn't there a show on A&E recently that claimed it was most likely the Sicilian Mafia? Axes were the preferred weapon of Sicilian hitmen in the early days of the mob. And they multiple killers only targeted Sicilian shop owners who'd borrowed money from the mob. Couldn't say on the show, but yeah, that's a prominent theory surrounding him or them. Normally though, the murder weapon was something the victim owned, normally a fire axe or a razor. His victims weren't limited to Sicilian shop owners as well, though some were non-immigrants such as Sarah Lawman. It's thought that a party promoter was the person who sent the letter demanding jazz be played. Axeman is very interesting because it's rarely mentioned that he only attacked Italian shopkeepers. Probably the most well-known series of hate crimes in the US. IIRC, an adaptation of this killer, was featured in American Horror Story. It was. I believe it was in Coven. Dean Corll. I almost puked when reading about the methods of torture he used on little boys. He was such an asshole that his teenage accomplice was the one that killed him, which revealed his 28+ murders to the public. There is a haunting photo of an unidentified victim that was found in his accomplice's property years after they got busted. Nobody has any clue who the kid is, but the image of distress on his face, and the toolbox full of torture tools next to him have forever been burned into my mind. One of the saddest stories is one of the boys he picked up was 14 years old, and on his way home from the gas station. He was saving up bottle caps for recycling money to take a girl to the movie, and he never made it home. Imagine how high on life that kid was. He must worked so hard to get the money together to take a pretty girl he probably had a crush on for a long time to the movies. He must been so happy on the walk home. But then he ended up dying a slow and painful death. Shit makes me tear up. Edit. The boy's name was James Stanton Dremela. He was the very last boy that Crow killed. Wonder if it was this guy's mom. What did he do? All I can really find is that he sodomized and raped the victims on a board, but not much else. I have spoiler tagged this as it's sensitive information and NSFW, but after some reading it looks like some pretty gruesome things he did include shoving glass rods up the boys' urethra and smashing them while they are inside, along with castrating them while they are still alive. I should not have read that. I should not have read that. Oh God, I should have listened. Oh God, I should have listened. I have heard of that torture before. It was a popular medieval thing. 2020 suddenly doesn't seem so bad. Yeah, our plagues and torture methods aren't the worst we've ever had, though I could still do with a little less plague and torture. A bunch of shit. He slowly ripped out their pubic hair, shoved glass rods up their urethra, and broke them while still inside, possibly used a 18-inch dildo on his victims and more. He even bit off the genitals of one of his victims and usually strangled them. A pretty messed up person in general. You should probably read about it. Edit. To make it worse, most victims were between 13 and 19 years old. There's a podcast called Last Podcast on the Left that does pretty deep dives into serial killers, cults, etc. Their episode on Dean Corll manages to convey his depravity. Web address. Pottle is the fucking tits. The Donner Party one was the first I listened to, and well, that's when the cannibalism started. He said it. He said the thing. Dean Corll is the serial killer that sticks out the most for me. What I find particularly horrifying, besides the photo and his methods of torture, is that so many young boys and men went missing from a particular neighborhood in Houston, and the police didn't think anything of it. From what I have read and heard regarding him, it was a combination of it being the 1970s, and that since the neighborhood was poor or working class, these were kids whose disappearances weren't high priority for law enforcement. Oh yes, the guy in Houston, I think, who grew up relatively wealthy with a candy company. He was another one who was not only a pedophile, but brutally tortured his victims. I am glad that so many of the people responding are particularly disgusted by these sadists because, quite frankly, they deserve the hate. Can't imagine how many people's lives he ruined, even the accomplices who got caught up and seduced in his evil. I believe at least one of them is still alive in prison. And yes, I have seen that picture. Horrific. My mother lived in Houston Heights when he was active. She actually had a crush on one of the boys he killed. He was friends with my uncles. One of my uncles used to bum rides to the beach to go surfing, and was riding with Corll before a gas station attendant they knew made him stay at the gas station instead. My mom says the cops really didn't care at the time because it was a poor neighborhood. Apparently they kept saying the boys were runaways rather than actually investigating the disappearances. Do the gas station guy knew something was up? It's always the gas station guy in every horror movie. The car of youths pulls up, fuels up, grabs some food and beer. They make a dumb redneck joke, and the servo guy goes, "You better watch out, the gas guy sees all and knows all." I am not sure. He was a guy that knew my mom and her brothers, so possibly he just didn't want my uncle riding with strangers. Maybe he got bad vibes off of Corll. Either way, the guy had good instincts. Brooks, one of the people involved, died in prison this year of COVID. Perhaps I had judged COVID too harshly. I would say Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo just because they were killing people in my hometown. I live like 2 minutes away from Karla's childhood home. That Karla got away basically scot-free, that she bamboozled the cops, disturbing girl. I hope the Canadian Secret Service will always keep one eye on that twisted woman. Didn't she also tell the court something like, Paul manipulated me into killing my sister, and said he would hurt me if I didn't? Bitch was lying. Pretty much. Proof of her involvement didn't come until after the so-called deal with the devil. Fucking scum, both of them. Didn't they cut her a deal before they saw the videotapes where she was obviously enjoying herself? Yes, the tapes weren't discovered yet. She now lives a normal life with a husband and 3 kids. And at one point was allowed to volunteer at her kids' school, and they were fine with it until the public found out and went apeshit. Because she found God, and of course that makes everything okay. That fucking scumbag is proof to me there is no karma. If karma was real, something awful would have happened to her a long time ago. Edit. Okay guys, I get it. That's not how karma works. I still don't think she'll get hers because pieces of shit like this often don't. IIRC, her lawyer more or less concealed the evidence. In some jurisdictions, like the UK, discovery of the new evidence would be enough for a retrial, and I think for the future we should change the law to enable that. She should still be shaking bars, along with Polly. The world would be a better place if they both died in prison. They sure weren't when she was discovered to be volunteering at her kids' school a few years back. I agree. As someone from Scarborough, that scared the crap out of me. Also Luca Magnotta. He went to my JR High. She freaking got away with everything, makes me wish Dexter was real. My friend's dad shared a bunk with Paul Bernardo when they were kids at summer camp for years. BTK. Worked code enforcement, so plenty of access to homes, prominent church member, family man, depraved murderer. Saw an interview with one of the prosecutors, said the scariest thing about Rader was, when you look at him, and talk with him after seeing what I have seen, you realize the Dennis Rader you're talking to is not the real Dennis Rader. Can you elaborate on that? I don't know much about him aside from what I have seen in Mindhunter. He was sort of a doddering fuckwit in his day-to-day. Just somebody's dad, who was visibly odd but inoffensive. Not unpleasant but not bright. But behind the scenes he was an extremely dangerous man who would hide in a family's home for hours before sneaking out to bind, torture, and sloppily kill all of them. Edit. He didn't rape anybody. After I read a book on him, I was more than a bit scared. I had a basement apartment at the time with one window that was sort of hidden from the street. Checked my closets when I got home for a while afterward. I am not op, but I am guessing he means that the man was acting like his family man self, and not the murderer he is. I remember this guy wanted to send some letters to the police on a floppy disk, and he asked them if they could trace him if he sent them the disk. The police said that they could not trace him using the disk. He sent them the disk. The police traced him using the disk and made the arrest. For a serial killer known for being intelligent, it really seemed like a stupid way to get caught. He was so arrogant that he didn't believe that the cops would lie to him. The most interesting part about BTK to me is that he almost certainly never would have been caught if he didn't get back into it with the floppy disk. But that is the thing about serial killers, most would not get caught if they didn't want the attention. If they just wanted to kill and be done with it, there wouldn't be much that the cops could do, especially years ago when public surveillance wasn't so pervasive. It's technically true, the floppy disk itself doesn't keep a record of where it is used. Unfortunately, or I guess, fortunately, they recovered a deleted Microsoft Word document that had metadata from the church computer he used to write the message that showed Rader as the user. I remember reading an article about a woman he was supposed to kill. As in, he scoped her out, planned the kill, swans by, broke into her house, and waited for her to walk through the door. She had a few too many drinks at a friend's house or something and ended up staying there. He left her a note. That's the kind of shit that keeps you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. He left her a note. Holy fuck. Can you imagine coming home to find a note like that waiting for you? That's sell everything and move territory. What makes it most disturbing is that his wife knew of the killings happening around the neighborhood, and when she brought it to his attention, he told her not to worry, and that BTK would not get her. I can't imagine what went through her mind when she found out he was BTK. That gave me chills. Israel Keyes, rapist, serial killer, necrophiliac. He was raised in a militant fundamentalist Christian household, joined the military, then came back to the US, and killed at least 11 people all over the country. He went to extraordinary lengths to not be caught by choosing victims at random, killing far from his home. He would hide kill kits and return years later, when he was ready to kill someone in that area. It's terrifying how he killed a woman in Alaska, went on vacation with his family to some Caribbean island for a few days, flew back to Alaska, took the poor woman's body and sewed her eyes opened and had her corpse pose with a newspaper that was a few days old to throw off law enforcement into thinking she was a runaway. Dismembered her. He then used her credit card in different states to show she was on the move. But that was what got him caught. That's one of the least scary trips he took. There was one in 2008. October 24, 2008. Alaska Airlines flight Anchorage to Seattle. October 25, 2008. Northwest Airlines flight Seattle to Minneapolis. October 25, 2008. Northwest Airlines flight Minneapolis to Grand Forks, ND. October 30, 2008. U.S. Airways flight Phoenix to San Francisco. October 31, 2008. Alaska Airlines flight San Francisco to Seattle. October 31, November 5, 2008. Vehicle rental Thrifty, 2008 Point Cruiser, Washington license plate 443 XQQ, drove 626 miles. Seattle, Washington. November 1, 2008. Hotel reservation Squim and Squim, Washington. November 2, 2008. Alaska Airlines flight Seattle to Boston, multi-city trip. November 5, 2008. Alaska Airlines flight Seattle to Anchorage. Read through that. Look at those dates. And the locations. He flew to North Dakota, and then 5 days later showed up in Phoenix to fly to California. 1,770 miles in 5 days isn't huge, but that's 1,770 miles the FBI have now had to search for missing people. The podcast True Crime Bullshit is all about Keyes, and despite him being mocked into the dirt on the pottle, I still think he's one of the most interesting and terrifying people ever. Web address. He didn't even go with his family, the asshole went all by himself on a 2-week cruise around the Gulf Coast. How did they catch him? It's been a long time, but I believe it was after he used a victim's credit card, after the FBI had urged either the credit card companies or law enforcement. It might have been both. I just can't remember to put this as a high priority. The foolish boy used it, and a Texas Ranger got him. So dumb. Go to all that effort and he gets caught by violating bad crime 101 rules. If I recall correctly, he got sloppy and reckless and used the debit card of his last victim, and they were able to track him and catch him. Link says he demanded ransom for a girl, and they tracked the account. If you really want to hate Israel Keyes even more, read his fucking terrible suicide poem. I hate how they call it chilling. It's stupid and cringy as fuck. Yes. I literally just commented saying this guy was such a pathetic loser who loved nu metal, and thought he was special. What an absolute piece of shit. Yeah, what always chilled me about this guy was, he was an average dude who wanted no fame or recognition. He truly was just killing for enjoyment, like making vacations out of it. It made me wonder how many people are like that out there, who haven't been caught. Israel Keys only got caught because he got careless at the end. I just read about Fred and Rose West, a married couple in the UK who collectively were among the most prolific serial killers in modern UK history. It is a grim tale of rape and incest and prostitution and brutal murders and dismemberment of family members and random strangers, some of whom they buried in the garden behind their house. It's a fascinating yet horrific story. There's a book by Mae West, their daughter, not the film star, called Love as Always, Mum XXX. It's an autobiography about Mae's life in the West's house, and is well worth the read. Needless to say, it was a house of horrors. There's a podcast called Unheard. The Fred and Rose West tapes by the journalist who covered them at the time, and wrote a book on them. When you hear their backstories, it's more a question of how unfortunate the circumstances were that they ever met, an absolute perfect storm of the most fucked up people imaginable. Also, there was a documentary on ITV tonight about how Rose had a relationship with Myra Hindley Moore's murderers in prison. Evil by Interpol is a great song about them. East Area rapist, who went on to become the Golden State Killer, and we now know as Joseph James D'Angelo. This guy would stalk his victims for weeks leading up to attacks, along with many other houses, while he was working as a police officer. When he attacked, he was relentless, and would stay in the house for hours messing with his victims. When cornered, he would kill without a second thought. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. Did some sick shit. Lived in Los Angeles, a dad and son team caught him in broad daylight. He gives me nightmares. I have a small story about this, and it pisses me the hell off still. A few years ago, in middle school, my history teacher was talking about how she was a young girl, and was terrified of the Night Stalker. She lived in the area of the killings. She moved a while later. She projected a picture of him up on the whiteboard, and some girl in class looks up and says, "Oh, he's hot." My teacher just stared at her and said, "He would have raped and murdered you and your mother. He's a disgusting, terrifying man." Honestly, I am so glad your teacher said that. Really shows how appearances can be deceiving. It really does. That teacher was interesting in general, but always stayed firm with stuff like that. The sick thing about it is that the girl turned away and said to her friend, "He's still hot." Bad things can come in pretty packages. That reminds me of last fall when I was taking a history class, and a girl said that she thought Rasputin was kind of hot. Then she added that he's hot in a Charles Manson kind of way. Oh my god, that's so fucked. Actually, the same girl who had the hots for Night Stalker also said Manson and Dahmer were hot too. Like, what goes through their minds? You just know she has a prison pen pal that she's married to now. My mom lived 5 minutes down the street from one of his victims in Mission Viejo before he was caught. She said she remembers how his presence in CA made everyone so scared they slept with windows shut even in the summer heat. And my mom had to call her husband at the time every day before he left work to make sure she knew when he'd be home by. I covered murder and rape trials as a reporter, saw some shit, and followed so many serial killer cases before. This case was the only one to give me full-on nightmares, the kind where you wake up heart racing, afraid of the dark kind of shit. The DC snipers John Allen Muhammad and John Lee Malvo. Not only were the killings completely random people filling up with gas, or walking in a parking lot, they started to move south, and I was still living in my hometown, Charlottesville, VA, so there was the fear they could make it that far south. I was in college in DC at this time. I remember the only advice was like, walk everywhere in a zigzag. I don't remember being super scared though. I think because the shootings were mostly happening in the suburbs, or maybe it was the invincibility of youth, or having come from New York, and 9 or 11, and just being used to living life in low-grade state of terror. Which, funny enough, the military teaches you pretty quick that zigzag shit is really nonsense. You want an unpredictable and erratic path of travel with lots of visual obstructions. Any decent sniper won't really have an issue tracking someone in a standard zigzag pattern. I saw a film or series of something in Iraq or Afghanistan. The squad mocked the guy running in zigzags, and also you realize how long that makes you expose as opposed to just running like fuck to cover. That was the HBO series Generation Kill. Loved that show. You legend, I love Reddit. I can just spew random memories from years ago, and someone links it together within 3 minutes. It never ceases to amaze how strong the crowdsourcing potential in Reddit is. Web address. Here is a clip, if you want to watch it again. Pure gold. I feel justified in not doing it now. Though at the time it was more like if I zigzag, the terrorists win. I was in NC, and was terrified every second I was outside as a kid. The randomness and complete lack of clues was just petrifying. I was a kid in the DC suburbs at the time, and you couldn't do anything outside for the entire month of October 2002. No sporting events, no recess, no outdoor PE, nothing. People were absolutely paranoid. I was in high school in the DMV area. Our outdoor fall sports were cancelled for a time for fear the snipers would target children. We were told to run zigzag when leaving the car to our destination. Crazy stuff. H. Holmes, he would trap people in a room with complete darkness, and either leave them to starve to death or cook them alive. There's a book, The Devil in the White City, if you want some more information on him. It's currently being made into a movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio, and directed by Martin Scorsese. Ah yes, The Devil in the White City discusses his house of horrors. I can't remember what serial killer it was, but he talked about how much he loved Holmes' house was inspired by it. Sick fuck. I believe you're thinking of Israel Keys. Israel Keys. He is the one that gives me nightmares. Death kits, completely random. I work for a company that was sort of founded at or debuted itself at the World's Fair, and every time someone talks about the company's origin story, I am always like, fun fact. While founder was demonstrating stuff our company does, right down the road was an active murder castle. He was the Bundy of his time. Nobody ever suspected him of anything because he was handsome and charming. He talked his way out of everything, from creditors to the families of the missing women that disappeared from his hotel. The railway killer in the late 90s, he rode trains throughout North America, and many of his victims were in Texas, where I lived as a teenager. We had railroad tracks just behind our backyard, and we frequently saw people riding in open or empty cars. When it became apparent a serial killer was riding on trains in Texas, my parents got the house alarm fixed, and then monitored, and my dad slept with a gun near his bed. I was in Illinois when the Tylenol tampering murders happened. I don't think they ever caught the person responsible. Yes, there have been other more heinous murderers, but this one was scary. Think the entire nation was terrified by what was happening. It is the randomness of the crime that there was never anybody convicted in that case that make it so frightening. The Zodiac, because of the spooky letters and phone calls. And the fact that not many people have basements in California. You can see why Hollywood loved to use him. He was the inspiration for the Scorpio killer in the first Dirty Harry movie, and why so many find him frightening, partly because he was cunning enough to be so brazen, and yet never get caught. Yeah, that's true. I read Graysmitha's book, listen to every podcast about it, and still don't buy that he was a killer mastermind. My guess is, he was just in the right place at the right time for a lot of his kills, and the cops just floated by many of the clues pointing to him. Circumstantial evidence, etc. He just got really lucky. My money is on Arthur Lee Allen. There was a super interesting Unsolved Mysteries episode years ago where they posed a theory that the Unabomber and the Zodiac Killer were the same person, Ted Kaczynski. Seems way too wild to be true, but there are some startling coincidences that are hard to ignore. Two separate true crime researchers, I don't think they were actual police investigators who came up with the same theory completely independent of one another, and eventually met and compared notes to find a lot of information that lined up. Season 9 Episode 1 with Robert Stack hosting. It's on Hulu and worth a watch for anyone interested. Some things I remember from the episode for those who don't want to watch or don't have Hulu, so spoilers below if you plan on watching the episode. In late 1967, the 25-year-old Kaczynski moves from Michigan and begins teaching mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley. Less than 1 year later, in the summer of 1968, the Zodiac killings begin. One of the two Zodiac killer survivors mentions that he said he was on the run and escaped from a prison up near Lincoln, Montana, or that's where the cops were after him from. I can't remember specifically. This puzzled investigators because that clearly wasn't true and was a pretty random and specific place to mention. Years later, Kaczynski is caught and arrested by the FBI at his small cabin in the wilderness in Lincoln, Montana. In one of his ciphers sent to the police, Zodiac claimed if it was decoded, it would reveal his identity. Eventually it was almost completely decoded, and was a long strange diatribe about killing, and how he enjoyed it. However, the final 21 characters have never been decoded. Investigators suspect this might be his signature. Could those 21 characters be Theodore John Kaczynski? The ages match up pretty well with how old Zodiac was assumed to be and how old Ted was at the time. There is also a striking resemblance between the police sketch of what Zodiac looked like and photographs of Ted at that time. In his last letters to the police, the Zodiac killer beings talking about bombs. Something he had never done before. He draws detailed diagrams of them and talks about how he will start using them on his next victims. He then vanishes altogether. A short time later, the Unabomber begins his bombings. Both Zodiac and the Unabomber like to write letters to the police and press and taunt them. They also both had a mutual interest in mathematics and symbols and ciphers. Things like that. Like I said, I don't know that I believe it, but it's definitely an interesting watch for people who like these types of true crime mystery or conspiracies. I do sort of feel like that would have come out after Kaczynski was arrested. Surely he would have taken credit for it if it were him, right? It's also worth mentioning there was nothing in the Unabomber's cabin to suggest he was the Zodiac. Edit. Added all the details I could remember from that episode. I might be missing a few. I know it's super weird, but I love falling asleep to old episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, LOL. It was like 4 a.m. one night when this one started autoplaying, and it woke me up and had me fully invested in the whole thing. Mr. Cruel Unsolved. He is an Australian serial rapist who abducted and sexually assaulted 3 girls, and is the prime suspect of the abduction and murder of another young girl. After sexually assaulting his victims, he bathed them carefully to get rid of evidence. One victim described it as like a mother washing a baby. In one case, he took a second set of clothes from the girl's home to dress her before he let her go. This case makes me feel so uneasy. I was at the same school as 2 of his victims during the time they were taken. The fear was indescribable after Carmine wasn't returned. The Toy Box Killer transcripts come to mind. If you absolutely want to have your day ruined, this has to be one of the most disturbing, creepiest things ever. David Parker Ray would play these tapes for his victims, so they had an idea of what was coming and to also mentally break them. Hear the start of one tape to give you an idea. Hello there, bitch. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained. Gagged. Probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal, under the circumstances. For a little while at least, you need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I am going to tell you in detail why you have been kidnapped, what is going to happen to you, and how long you all be here. I don't know the details of your capture, because this tape is being created July 23, 1993, as a general advisory tape for future female captives. Not to be confused with the toolbox killers, who are somehow even worse. Don't read the transcript. It's the most awful thing I have ever read. Sometimes when I am trying to sleep, the details of that transcript run through my head. To anyone who hasn't already read it, it's probably better that you don't. I never want to read that transcript again. I think I read that before I got sober. It fucking scarred me drunk years ago. Same with Serbian film. This is the one for me too. I cannot stress enough. Do not listen to those tapes. You can't unread it or unhear it. The guy who ate children in the early 20th century and wrote letters to their parents talking about how their asses tasted. Worst killer I have ever read about. Albert Fish. He only wrote to the mother of Grace Budd, and I think he only had 2 victims, but he was disgusting and a massive piece of shit. The guy was a real jerk. Robert Pickton. Piece of shit, killed poor, street-involved Native women. And police knew. The Canadian with the pig farm. Yup, read his case. And agreed so many serial killers choose prostitutes as their victims because they know a dead Sally in the alley gets so little attention, particularly if they are POC. One of the reasons it's believed Wayne Williams was able to kill so many children in Atlanta. I remember reading one of the profilers of the Green River Killer got angry with a detective because he referred to one of the prostitute victims as NHI, no human involved. Sex workers may have their own problems, but no one deserves to die the way Pickton killed them. There is a Criminal Minds episode based off this. That's why it sounded so familiar. Something you'll often hear about with serial killers is the concept of the less dead, i.e., people the police are less inclined to investigate the disappearances of because they're considered undesirables. That's part of the reason guys like Pickton and the Hillside Stranglers were so prolific. My childhood home is less than 5 minutes from his farm. All our parents used to go to his illegal bar Piggy's Palace. I just finished Mindhunter the other day, so this question is interesting. It would be the killer of the Atlanta kids. Yeah, they arrested Wayne Williams. But he might not kill all of them. The case was never solved. Terrifying. This question was inspired by me finishing John Douglas' book Mindhunter, on which the series is based. And yes, it is the uncertainty of these cases that can be maddening. One can easily envisage a scenario where even if Wayne Williams was the primary killer, which in my cheap 2 cents think he was, there may well have been another kitty raper who used the ongoing murders as a chance to kill his own victim or 2 and blame it on WW. Richard Ramirez. He had no motivation and invaded people's homes. You could avoid some serial killers by staying away from their he was random. I was also in the D.C., Northern Virginia area doing construction during the D.C. sniper. I even got gas at one of the gas stations where a lady was shot days later. There are some serial killers that I think, well, if the doctors and therapists had gotten to them, maybe they were salvageable. Richard Ramirez is not one of them. He took a depraved joy in what he did. He was also almost killed by the mob that caught him. Nobody deserves to die, ripped apart by an angry mob, but if one had to be, Richard Ramirez wouldn't be a bad choice. I lived near enough to 2 of his break-ins to be terrified at 18 years old. Ted Bundy. There are separate accounts of him transforming himself, noticeably changing in front of a jail official and a relative at a bus station, to the point he smelled and felt different to them. He spoke of the entity within himself, and he was really good at changing his appearance and evading capture. Something freaky about that monster. I remember watching a documentary on Bundy, and they mentioned that he had the type of face that could look very different depending on what kind of beard or haircut he had or how much weight he had gained or lost. They showed a collection of different pictures of him, and it was uncanny. The guy was like a chameleon. It blew my mind that they were all pictures of the same guy. The fact that he was government-sanctioned puts Joseph Mengele over the top for me. I am also someone who puts a lot of value on science, so his crimes cut particularly close. Any of the cannibalistic ones. And Ted Bundy, because his ashes were spread where some of his victims were found. In the end, he was still with them. There are likely remains out there still. Confused face. I don't want to think of it that way. The victims were found and put to rest with family and friends. He was spread lonely in a field, and no one gave a shit. Albert Fish, not only was he a serial killer but also a cannibal and child rapist. Once when he killed one of his victims, who was named Grace, he wrote a sickening letter to her family detailing the brutality that he had put her through, in agonizing detail. I swear to God, hearing about him made me glad that we live in the modern age. Bastard was a sick freak. He jumped to my mind when I read the title. I remember the letter where he told his attorney about making a stew of a child, with onions and carrots. I believe that was also detailed in the Grace Budd letter. Yes, he is one of the classic sick freaks, what with his cannibalism and child murders. Pretty sure Dahmer said he'd read a lot about Fish, so Albert's evil legacy lived on long after his well-deserved death. Wiki: none of the jurors doubted that Fish was insane, but ultimately, as one later explained, they felt he should be executed anyway. Wow! You are still with us. Thanks for being such a nice person. As long as you are here, why not like this video and subscribe to our channel? Also, you can press the bell icon, so you won't miss any future uploads.